I'm just trying to find the question.
All
Yep.
right. Good afternoon, Ambassador. Welcome. I really appreciate you for taking the time to speak to me today.
With pleasure.
Awesome. Just to just in general, what have you been up to for the past days? What projects are you working on? Those that you can disclose, of course.
Sorry, you asking me what I've been working on? Or
Yeah. Like what have you been?
maybe before we start, can you tell me what what you were working on and why you're interviewing me? What's
Oh,
you're a bit you were frozen. Did you hear what I said?
I don't know. Could you please repeat that? I think the connection just went bad for a little bit.
Yeah. Before we start, maybe you could tell me what you are working on and what his interview questions will feed into.
So this interview, I'm doing consultancy work with Atomic Reporters, and uh, we wanted to put a compilation of a video where I speak to activists and talk about issues around the Nihon Hidankyo's Nobel Peace Prize, and talk about non-proliferation issues and disarmament issues.
So the interview is background for you for your work, then talking to activists or
With
what?
Atomic Reporters.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So do you want us to start now?
Yeah. So is the recorded interview going to be used for, or is it just background for you?
Yes. I know Peter wanted to, maybe let me just pause. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for joining me today. I think let's just jump into it so that I don't take much of your time. I initially sent you some of these questions so that you can just have a brief idea of what we're going to be talking about today. And my first question will be, do you believe the Nobel Peace Prize win for Nihon Hidankyo has catalyzed a shift in global sentiment towards nuclear disarmament, particularly in a time when the arms control infrastructure is eroding?
Well, I think the recognition of this organization through the Nobel Peace Prize is very important and will contribute to a bigger debate. It brings the issue of nuclear weapons and the impact of nuclear weapons more into the public discourse, which is very, very important. It can contribute to a global, more public understanding, and therefore it can contribute to a shift. But I don't think that the Nobel Peace Prize on its own can lead to this shift. It's a contribution. Change on nuclear weapons will happen through much, much broader societal debate about nuclear weapons and about the impact of nuclear weapons. And I think this is a very important contribution to it. So I think the reason why the Nobel Peace Prize was given to this organization was very much future oriented. Of course, it's an organization of hibakusha who experienced nuclear weapons almost 80 years ago. But in reality, the reason why the Nobel Peace Prize has been given is because it's such a pertinent issue right now. And we're in such a dangerous situation with nuclear weapons that to recognize the hibakusha is to bring into the public discourse their experiences with nuclear weapons, which is highly relevant for the situation that we are at the moment. So I think it's an important contribution to the global debate, but it will not in on its own change the dynamic on nuclear weapons, but it's a very important contribution, and I was really pleased to when I learned about this decision.
I think I can say from my side as well, it was really um, a moment when the win was announced, because considering where we are right now in terms of international politics and the global political climate, I think this win was really needed and it was really timely. So when it happened, for myself, it gave me hope that at least these conversations can carry on and we can continue to see some light where we might think that, the infrastructure is, the global arms control infrastructure is under threat. So this gave me a little bit of hope that, well, there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Mm.
And you may, go ahead.
No, I still think there's far too much ignorance in the wider public about the very, very high risk of nuclear weapons that we face. I think most people choose to prefer not to think about it because it's too horrible. I think maybe as humans, we like to screen out things that are as unpleasant as imagining what would happen if nuclear weapons are used. So countering this ignorance is absolutely the most important thing. It's not the nuclear weapons, the solution to the nuclear weapons issue is not going to come from the security expert community on its own. It will have to be a really broad discussion in society involving lots of different stakeholders. And I think the personal experiences of hibakusha are really very, very pertinent for this. So I think this is an important contribution to such a debate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And could you elaborate like on the role of activists within this field? How do you feel, what do you think we should be doing as activists to put to make the conversation continue going?
I think contributing to education, I think that's important to the knowledge. I think, as I mentioned just before, there is still a huge level of ignorance. People know, if at all, they know of nuclear weapons from Hollywood movies, maybe. They may have in their minds some black and white pictures from the aftermath of Hiroshima, but they don't really understand the destructive power of the nuclear weapons arsenals that are in the hands of 9 states today. They don't understand the fragility of a security architecture that is built on permanent global threat of mass destruction, where never anything is allowed to go wrong. I think the precariousness of this status quo is ignored. And I think people need to understand that, so that to reinforce the necessity for a paradigm shift. I think all of this is what activists can point out. I think make people care about this issue and also give them a sense of agency that it is an existential threat to humanity, but of all the existential threats of humanity, it's actually the one that can be solved most easily, because at the end of the day, it's a political decision and nothing else. Climate change, that's a really difficult thing to deal with. Nuclear weapons, by comparison, is actually a lot easier. So there is agency for every human being on this planet on this issue if they want to organize. And the more we can see this, the better the chances are that we'll actually find a way to solve this issue. So I think governments need to see active civil society on this issue in order to feel the pressure to change it. I think what activists can also do is as I said before, take this issue out of the security policy bubble. Yeah, it's been discussed now mostly by security policy experts, and the disarmament camp is often seen as sort of idealist, not serious, don't understand security, peace movement, people who essentially don't understand security. I think that's the assertion of those who argue in favor of nuclear weapons. I think civil society and activists have a real strong, important role to play to change that. That it is actually very serious arguments in favor of nuclear disarmament. That there are lots of flaws behind the thinking of nuclear deterrence, and pointing out the consequences and risks that these weapons bring. So I think the role of activists is absolutely quintessential on this issue to bring about this wider discourse in society. I think that's the only way. It's one conversation at a time to change the thinking about nuclear weapons, and to get people to question some of these assertions that are being made about nuclear weapons, that we have these weapons so that they are never used, that we have these weapons so that they guarantee your security. All of these are slogans which are actually built on rather shaky ground if you really challenge these assumptions. These are the conversations that we need to have.
Okay. I like that you brought up the fragility of the security architecture that we have at the moment, and also you pointed out the camps that exist at the moment. Like if you go on Twitter, you see you have the security experts camp, you have the deterrence camp, you have the disarmament camp, you have it becomes very interesting. Like the dynamics are quite interesting when you see the debates around these topics, and how no one from each camp wants to listen to the other. And sometimes the rhetoric actually gets very personalized, or it gets to a point where it's no longer a debate about, let's say, disarmament or deterrence or whatever. It becomes about personal attacks, which has been very worrying for me. It's amazing that people are resorting to personal attacks when such issues are being discussed. And as young, I think the young emerging experts in this field, we are looking at these exchanges, and it gives us pause as well to want to address anything, because you now say, oh, if I say something, am I going to be personally attacked based on maybe my skin color or my race or anything? So it's giving us pause a little bit.
I think one of the I think it's interesting what you say, and I can absolutely see that. It's the discussion around deterrence and disarmament has sometimes been compared to almost theological debates. Yeah, it's very strong belief systems, really. But I think it's actually important to understand that at the end of the day, it's nothing but belief systems. Yeah, and belief cannot really be proven. So the best way to start a conversation that would probably take us forward is to acknowledge everything that we don't really know. And there's an awful lot on either side of the debate that we don't know. If I'm skeptical of nuclear deterrence, which I am, I have to admit that I cannot prove that nuclear deterrence doesn't work. It may work in most cases. It may work in some cases. But if you're skeptical of nuclear disarmament, you also have to acknowledge that you cannot prove yourself that nuclear deterrence will work. And if you have a situation in which it works, you don't know if tomorrow in another circumstance it will work again. So what are then the conclusions that need to be drawn from the fact that at the end of the day, we don't really know? I think that's the really most important thing, to acknowledge the lack of certainty around much of that. So I'm aware of the fact that my sort of arguing against nuclear deterrence is not based on proof or disproof of nuclear deterrence working or not working, but I'm coming from the side that if I understand that I cannot prove or disprove it, then let's look at what it is we can prove. And I think that's the interesting thing, that we have a lot more proof about what would happen if nuclear deterrence fails. That's where we have a really growing and solid body of scientific evidence that tells us what happens if deterrence fails. And since you cannot know if nuclear deterrence will work or not work, I think merely from the precautionary principle, you should rather focus and you should rather put your policy decisions on those aspects where you actually have proof, which is the consequences and risks. And I think this is an absolutely compelling set of arguments why we need to find a way out of this security paradigm.
Yeah. So just bringing back the conversation to the Nobel Peace Prize win. After the Nobel Peace Prize win, Japan announced that it would attend they would think about attending the next TPNW meeting as an observer. Do you see this as a meaningful shift in Japan's stance towards nuclear disarmament? And do you think it signals a potential opening for further engagement with the treaty's goals, the TPNW, that is? Or we are we are over expecting?
There are two aspects to the question. Do I see this as an opening for constructive engagement? Absolutely, yes. I think TPNW states parties have been absolutely clear that we would welcome, we would not only welcome any observer, we actually think that anybody who says that they are serious about nuclear disarmament needs to be part of the conversation of the TPNW. Yeah, so I find it actually hard to justify, if not inexcusable, not to be part of these discussions. And if you can't sign the treaty for whatever reasons, then be there as an observer. So I think it's absolutely necessary. I wouldn't go so far that the Japanese decision to consider attending as an observer indicates any shift in Japan on nuclear weapons. Japan, for the time being, is very strongly believing on the need for extended deterrence by the United States. Japan, of course, has the most active civil society on the nuclear disarmament side, given its own history. And there's more public debate about nuclear weapons in Japan than probably anywhere else. So there is a considerable amount of civil society pressure for Japan to participate as observer. But what does participating as observer actually mean? It does not imply, it does not create any legal neither expectations nor obligations all it is that you respect this treaty, that you participate, and that you signal your readiness to be part of the conversation. That's all it is. So I would not overestimate this decision. If Japan decides to participate as observer, then fine. I think we would all welcome it. But it's also not the main news of the TPNW. Whether countries participate as observer or not is not the main issue for the TPNW. The main issue is what the states parties of the TPNW do to further the objectives of the treaty. I think that should be the focus of discussion, and not if a country decides to be there as observer or not, as welcome as that would be undoubtedly.
So I just wanted to comment, earlier this year, I was part of a policy cycle on humanitarian impacts with the British American Security Information Center's Emerging Voices Network, EVN. And the focus group I was on, we had to look at the P5 and how individually they are putting policies, well, domestically that talk about humanitarian impacts of nuclear weapons. And our findings were actually quite interesting, like how they are doing it or not doing it. So these conversations of participation in the TPNW or being an observer at the TPNW, I think these are very important conversations that need to be had. And if we can get the P5 to be party, that would really be awesome. And I just wanted to ask you, what has been the outreach like in that regard to have them participate, at least as observers?
Well, I was president of the first meeting of states parties in June 2022, and I did outreach in all of those countries, in all the P5 countries, and with most of the countries under extended deterrence. We had a few who participated, but which I think was very welcome. I think in Vienna we had Norway as participating. We had Belgium, Finland, Sweden, a few other countries who are not signatories of the TPNW. But it's interesting when you talk about, when you said you looked at how the nuclear weapon states are implementing or on the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons aspect. I think there has been virtually no engagement on this issue. I think the conversation stops really with a general acknowledgement that that the impact of nuclear weapons would be very negative, of course, would be catastrophic. And then you hear from the nuclear weapon states, and this is why they would never, that this is why they should never be used. And this is why we need nuclear weapons to ensure that they are never used. Yeah, so there is an acknowledgement of the humanitarian consequences, but it is then used as a means to underscore the effectiveness of nuclear deterrence. We never actually have an engagement on the details. We never have an engagement on the what does it mean for third countries? Yeah, what does it mean? What is the implication? You're sitting in South Africa. The main studies about nuclear winter were based on projections between a limited nuclear war between India and Pakistan. So if a war, a nuclear conflict between two countries in the northern hemisphere leads to a famine in sub-Saharan Africa, this of course raises incredibly profound legal issues, legitimacy issues, international justice issues from a country from the perspective of sub-Saharan Africa. But you never get an engagement from the nuclear weapon states on this issue. beyond the fact that we acknowledge that these consequences would be dire. So we need nuclear weapons so this never happens. But we never go actually further than that. To my knowledge, it's only the United States who has even said that they would only consider using nuclear weapons in compliance with international humanitarian law. But of course, you do not hear from the US how in concrete terms this would be possible. So what does it then mean for targeting? What does it mean for the actual selection of targets? From the other nuclear weapon states, you haven't heard anything. Yeah, they simply do not want to talk about it because, of course, the end point of a conversation about the real impact of nuclear weapons would be the acknowledgement that it has terrible consequences on third countries that have nothing to do with the conflict between the nuclear weapon states. So the collateral damage is built in the possession of nuclear weapons and the practice of nuclear deterrence. The collateral damage of probably the whole rest of the world is built into it. But you never have conversations about it because it's, of course, very unpleasant conversations for the countries that inflict these risks on the rest of the world. So we need to move to the point where we go beyond this very kind of stale and unproductive general exchange about the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons. We need to move from the abstract talking about it to the real concrete conversation about what does it mean for country X, what can be done, what are the threats, what are the risks, what is being done in terms of taking into account the civilian population in third countries, what is being done to consider damages, for example. All of these issues. There are lots of subsequent conversations which would follow if you would have a real in detail conversation about the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons. And I think because, first of all, nuclear weapon states assume or are so invested in their trust in nuclear deterrence that they probably really believe it will never happen, that they think we have this weapon so that they will never be used, so it will never actually become an issue. I think that's part of the conversation. Or the other alternative is that they know that these implications would arise, so let's rather not have a conversation about it because it would be very unpleasant. And I think we have to, the non-nuclear weapon states have to continue insist on having this engagement to actually talk about these issues in concrete terms, because it is, of course, a clear and present security concern for not only for the countries who have these weapons, but for every living being on this planet.
Wow, I think we could have conversations about these issues for the whole day. And thank you very much for sharing your perspectives on this. I really appreciate it. For the sake of time, do you have any final remarks that you want to make? Nothing. I think you have said it all.
Other than wishing you all the best, and I enjoyed our talk.
Yeah, thank you very much. I truly appreciate it. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for joining me. I'm just going to stop the video now, and then we can talk a little bit.